Hi, I'm live from Pellam's Wasteland, and today I am back with another episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads. Last episode, I was talking about potentially doing this a little more often, and then I got inspired to do exactly that. So here we go. This time, I want to talk not necessarily about a specific book or set of books, but about an author in general. The author is Mark Samuels, who I have read the four of these up here: The Man Who Collected Machen, Glyphotech, The White Hands, and Written in Darkness, all of which are collections of short stories that are a whole lot of fun. I really enjoy the various stories in these collections. Of the four kind of shown here, I would say The Man Who Collected Machen is probably my favorite. I haven't read that one as recently as some of the others. I reread White Hands and Other Weird Tales, and I read for the first time Written in Darkness just fairly recently, and both of them I liked a lot. There's a lot of elements that I really enjoy that are consistent throughout Mark Samuel's various stories, and there's a really interesting way in which there's I suppose a sort of consistency in structure that is a contrast to the varieties of ideas and stuff. Most of these are fairly short stories. Most of these collections are fairly short. I think most of them in print are not quite 200 pages, and on digital are shorter even than that. And most of the short stories contained in here are really you know fun and interesting and short. They're not stories that overstay their welcome in any way. They're really, most of these are like 10 or 15 pages, some of them a little longer than that, but very few of the, like, 40 or 50 page longer short stories. And in any of these different collections, you get a wonderful variety of all of the ideas that are at play throughout these different collections. Mark Samuels, the so many of the stories are they are horror, but they have a kind of a particular um, interest and feel, I guess. There's a great way in which so many of them revolve around technology and modernity in interesting ways. So you have one of the kind of continual motifs throughout these stories is things like static, especially kind of static on the radio or on a CRT TV, things like that, and the kind of blend of static as it is kind of potentially experienced in the kind of paranoid delusion of what if it starts to sound more like whispering rather than understanding that it really is kind of totally meaningless. And that's a classic element that is in a lot of these stories, this idea of kind of experiential uh, treatment, or this kind of particular seeing signs, even where there's a sort of intellectual resistance to that, or there's a kind of cultural resistance, right? This idea of a very kind of classic, in many ways central to thematically what the Gothic about this idea of obsession and potentially delusion and madness and the alienation from the sort of common existence of other individuals. And that is totally at play here, this idea of characters who see signs where no one else would see, the kind of significance in these pieces of technology or in graffiti or all of these different kind of things that are not necessarily treated as meaningful signs always, but that the characters become very enraptured with. Or there's another one of the stories. I guess I'll start kind of spoiling some of the specific details of specific stories, um, because they're so much fun to read even without figuring out precisely what's going on. They're not, I would say, really stories where enjoying these is dependent on the sort of mystery of what's going on so much as it is in engaging with the texture of the tale, basically. So like there's one wonderful story that I remember that is about essentially a basically a pathogen that is transmitted through language, where the pathogen itself is the um, language, and that hearing someone speak it is enough to infect somebody, and that understanding the language is the sort of illness, basically. And it's sort of fascinating and wonderful, and such a cool and interesting idea, and is totally what so many of these stories are about. These kind of interesting and fun and very, very flavorful horror ideas that are dealt with quickly, and then that's the whole story. And so it's really um, hard to say enough good things about Mark Samuels as a writer. So many of these stories are just really fun and weird, and don't ever run into the issue, I think, with short stories, because sometimes short stories are published in these type of single author collections, and then you also get often with a number of short stories, original publication is in a setting where you do not have all of just one author's stories. And I think there are some authors who suffer from having a bunch of their stories next to each other, and some authors that benefit from it. And I think about, like, for instance, every time I read a longer Lovecraft collection, and I think, oh, well, this is all right, but I think it would be a lot more fun if the Lovecraft, all of the Howard Phillipsisms were broken up by some other short stories in, something like Weird Tales, where it was originally published, as opposed to what starts to feel like a slog of, like, oh yes, it was another unknowable horror, and all of the things that kind of get me about those stories. And I think, by contrast, part of what is so much fun about Mark Samuels is that his stories, I think, are just fun to continue to engage with as the collection of Mark Samuel stories, in a way that some authors, it can feel more like a chore to do that. And so that's kind of a core identifiable symptom of just how much I like these stories. Um, all of the ones shown here are available in digital on some platforms. I don't remember all of. I mean, I assume they're basically all somewhere on the Kindle store. Although some of them might be. I don't remember if, like, the White Hands and Other Weird Tales. I know the version shown here is the Tartarus Press edition. Um, I know they have a web store themselves, and then also they have really cool. If you ever get a chance to pick up one of their books in print, they do really, really great, um, well crafted small print run of these types of stories. I think I first discovered their press with Sarbin, who is an author that I really enjoy. In particular, The Sound of His Horn is one of those novellas that has stayed with me for a long time, that I think is fun and weird. But unfortunately, it is definitely very small print runs, and so it's kind of hard to get a hold of their stories in print form, just because they run out. So I have a handful of those, but I read this one on digital. So anyway, like I said, all of these Mark Samuel stories are really fun. They're weird and interesting, and present the kind of exaggerated horrors of modernity, for lack of a better term. This way in which they engage with things like, urban decay and alienation, and like how much it sucks to work in an office in an anonymous cubicle is a classic element that is in a number of these stories. And things like, static on TV or radio, the sort of sense of messages from the beyond that have to do with the basic background radiation of the universe, things like that. There's all of this kind of fun and weird stuff, and a lot of like really fun kind of metatextual elements or treatment of other stories. I mean, The Man Who Collected Machen is a story about kind of obsession and self-destruction in the tradition of Arthur Machen, that is also about Arthur Machen stories, which is really fun and interesting. And if you like Arthur Machen, and you should, because Arthur Machen is really great, you will probably enjoy this type of story, and the way that it plays with the the flavor of his stories in crafting its own kind of new story is something that's really fun and interesting, and totally worth reading. And I guess that's the perhaps my kind of core thing to leave you with, is that these books of short stories are all like really short. You can totally read one of these in like a single afternoon, Sunday afternoon, not doing anything, just open up one of these Mark Samuels collections and read a bunch of fun and weird horror. And they're so good and so much fun, and you should totally read more of these and more stuff like it. This kind of, the horror that embraces the weird in a way that there's kind of other flavors of horror, but this kind of particular tradition of weird, and all of the stuff related to Arthur Machen, and to some degree like Algernon Blackwood, and all of the authors that H.P. Lovecraft read and then didn't write as much as well as they did. And that's, I keep talking about H.P. Lovecraft, but anyway, yeah, Mark Samuels. It's super super fun, totally worth reading. I would start from the four shown here with The Man Who Collected Machen. Glyphotech, I also remember being really good. The White Hands and Other Weird Tales and Written in Darkness, I enjoyed a lot, and if you can find them, totally read them. But I didn't think they were quite as strong as those two, in my opinion. Although maybe, I don't know, I'd have to reread those first two also to double check, I guess. Um, but really, all of these are super fun and will totally give you a sense of the particular flavor of these tales in general on some level, and so totally worth checking out. Read it and see what you think, and you might discover an author that you really like, which you should, because this is a really good author that is totally worth liking. So anyway, that's going to be it for me for today. Nothing else really to say other than read more of Mark Samuels, and I guess Arthur Machen, and any of these, weird Tartarus Press things, Sarba and the Sound of His Horn. Maybe I'll reread it and do an episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads on that one also. But otherwise, for now, yeah, go read some fun and weird books. I have been live from Pellam's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.